Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, and I'm away from the news forum, but I can still tell you that the news forum is where all voices matter. Cybercrime, it comes in all shapes and sizes, but nowadays certain states specialize in it. This includes North Korea, and our guest today has a chilling warning about its impacts. Joining us is Anthony Ruggiero. He is a former U.S. National Security Council Director for North Korea and presently a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies in Washington, D.C. Welcome to our program, Anthony.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm going to start with this term. What is the Lazarus heist? What's that all about?
Well, it's a book. There's a book written by Jeff White, who's an investigative reporter in the United Kingdom, but it really chronicles, for the most part, the focus on the Lazarus Group, which is a group that is connected to the North Korean government and has conducted these heists. Essentially, they have used cyber for terrorism. And then they've used it for financial gain, and then now they've used it for other purposes. It's really a fascinating insight into how the North Korean regime has adjusted to the U.S. sanctions regime.
So let's get into a little bit of the history of this Lazarus Group. How did it start? What are its intentions, and what's its impact?
Well, I think on the North Korea side, there's always been a concern about their ability to use cyber against the United States, against South Korea. That really started in earnest around 10 years ago. And the Lazarus group name, they've been called other things as well, but that's the one that we know them the most by. I think for a lot of Americans, especially, they may or may not remember this, especially given how many remember the fire and fury with North Korea in 2017 and 2018. But really, back in 2014, when this movie called The Interview came out, which was this comedy with Seth Rogen and James Franco.
I remember it. Yeah.
Right. The plot is assassinating a fictitious Kim Jong-un, the actual current dictator of North Korea. And actually, the North Korea hackers broke into Sony Pictures Entertainment, which was the one who was putting this movie out, and essentially destroyed many of their computers. But then the thing that I think maybe some people forget is that the hackers actually threatened a 9/11 style attack on the theaters that would show the movie. And in this case, the theaters actually capitulated. And then President Obama criticized the theaters, saying, if a dictator can just reach into the United States and target our freedom of expression, where does that put us? And honestly, when you look at, and Jeff White does in his book, when you look at North Korea's cyber activities, they've only grown since then and become even more menacing, if not with that specific open threat to the United States.
So what are their objectives precisely now?
I think their main overall objective right now is to get money for their regime elites, so they can buy, their fancy cars and liquor and other things. It's not going to the North Korean people. Then also using those resources for the nuclear weapons, the prohibited nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs. But there's always still that terrorism aspect in the back of their cyber activities. And I think in the case of a war or pre-war or some kind of military conflict, they would probably use cyber as well, especially on South Korea, probably Japan, and probably try against the United States as well.
Well, you raise a good point, because their target isn't just the USA. It is South Korea and Japan as well.
Right, and many of these stories actually don't just target the United States. I mean, WannaCry is another one that they've been linked to, that targeted many other countries beside the United States. We can get into as well how they targeted the Bangladesh bank. So the United States is not the only target here.
We're going to continue our discussion with Anthony Ruggiero. He's an expert on North Korean cybercrime, and he is a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. We're going to take a short break. Please stay with us. We'll be back after these brief messages. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Anthony Ruggiero. He is a senior fellow at the Federation for the Defense of Democracies, formerly at the National Security Council in the US, talking about this massive cybercrime network that the North Koreans have. I do wonder, Anthony, I guess our perception is that North Korea is such a backward society in many ways. But of course, they have nuclear warheads, so they can't be that backward. But how did they get to be cybercrime experts?
Yeah, this is something that has plagued. I've worked on North Korea since 2001, starting focused on their nuclear missile programs, and then eventually focusing on sanctions to stop those programs. But I think this has been a consistent theme when people look at North Korea. North Korea does have significant issues with famine and other issues in their past, but they have developed a nuclear weapons program. They have developed intercontinental ballistic missiles and tested all of those successfully, and they're moving forward on that. It's not surprising, at least to me, that looking at their cyber activities that they've become more sophisticated. I guess the other thing I would say is that there's actually a level above just cyber activities, what we used to call illicit activities, because again, this might be something that people don't recall, but North Korea used to counterfeit US currency. Now I say used to because there haven't been recent examples. Now maybe they're still doing it and it just hasn't been caught, but it was so good that was hard to really detect these $100 bills that they were counterfeiting, and that was just another way for them to make money for their regime. They've also done, pharmaceuticals and just the whole list of and the counterfeit currency and counterfeit cigarettes linked all the way back to Ireland. I mean, to your question earlier about the global nature of this, but essentially all of these activities, the illicit activities, including cyber, is their effort, North Korea's effort to really try and find the weaknesses in the sanctions regime, whether it's the sanctions themselves in terms of the entities and individuals and banks that are targeted, but then also us not caring as much, right? I say in my review of Jeff White's book that the way we've been successful is dedicating the resources to this effort. And frankly, since 2018, including the Trump administration that I served in, and currently the Biden administration, we're not focused on it enough. And when that happens, then North Korea is gonna find those loopholes.
Yeah, is it a result of other geopolitical issues like China and Russia crowding it out? Is that part of the story, or is there something else at play there?
Right. I think that's part of it. There's only so many resources to go around, especially when you talk about the people who write sanctions packages, primarily in the Treasury Department here in the United States. That's one issue. I'd say the other issue is there's this perception beyond what you asked earlier in terms of this assumption, right, that they're not as sophisticated enough. That's one. But I think the other aspect is people tend to throw their hands up and say, well, they already have nuclear weapons. They already have long range ballistic missiles. There's no way we're going to get to denuclearization, which, we can debate whether that's true or not. But the primary point here is that these sanctions and making sure that they're continually maintained actually make it more difficult for them to advance those programs. So there's value in doing that in of itself, even if the long-term goal seems to get longer and longer term on denuclearization.
So what are the West's vulnerabilities then? Can you itemize those?
Well, right now, so the North Koreans, I think we talked about earlier, they tried to steal $1 billion from the Bangladesh central bank. They got only about $81 million, but that was still a lot. They've done some of these ATM heists where they get money from those. Now they're focused on stealing virtual currency, and they're stealing upwards in the hundreds of millions of dollars worth. Now, of course, as we all know, that value fluctuates, but I think the way they note it is the value when it's stolen, and it's several hundreds of millions of dollars now. That's really a vulnerability they've started to exploit.
So, is it mostly then online activity? Is that the big thing right now?
Online, and even through online gaming and the like. And right now, the Treasury Department has been targeting how they obscure that money that's stolen.
We're going to return with our guest, Anthony Ruggiero. We're talking about North Korean cybercrime and basically all of its dimensions, which is a lot. Please stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Anthony Ruggiero. He is an expert on North Korean cybercrime and is presently at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies in Washington, D.C. Anthony talked a little bit about the West's vulnerabilities in the previous segment. What are businesses and the government doing about these vulnerabilities?
Well, I think this is a broader issue than just North Korea. I
Sure
know
is.
that folks are very focused on trying to make themselves cyber secure, and unfortunately, again, beyond just North Korea, those who are trying to either trick us or do things against us are becoming even more and more sophisticated. Even not just those who are state sponsored. I think when it comes to North Korea, this becomes the issue. It gets back to what we talked about before in terms of dedicating the resources and focusing on it enough. Because if you had a robust sanctions campaign where you're implementing sanctions, you're going overseas, you're making sure that companies and individuals and banks are not doing business with North Korea, which is not as easy as it seems, right? And the North Koreans do a good job of hiding themselves. Then the cyber issue, even though it's hundreds of millions of dollars, it will be one segment of that. And
Right.
perhaps it would become harder for North Korea to be able to do those things. But right now, as I like to say, not just on the cyber side, but Kim Jong Un, the leader of North Korea, likes the status quo. I mean, it works for him. He's able to develop his programs. It seems seemingly because even the sanctions that Treasury has put out against these so-called mixers, which basically take some of these proceeds and hide the origin and the counterparties. They've gone after two of them that North Korea has used. So not just for North Korea activities, but broader activities the mixers have been used for. But many of that is after the fact, right? So
Right.
it's after it's used by criminals and others like North Korea. So we've got to get ahead of that. I think would be one area. I know it's a new area that so to give people credit for that, but we're seeming a little behind the curve, especially on the North Korea side.
Is there starting to be more international state to state cooperation on this?
Right. I think there is. I think in the United States, especially, like there's been a number of senior officials put in positions on the cyber side. It's being emphasized more quickly than in other administrations. It's one of those things where it's been happening. We know it's all been happening, but dedicating the resources has not happened as of yet, but is starting to happen. I think in this administration, to their credit.
Right.
And I think, but again, it gets back to it's this constant back and forth with whether it's just North Korea or with the other criminals and state actors. So it's going to constantly be a back and forth of securing ourselves, some level of deterrence, and then whether, and this obviously will be hotly debated, whether you go on offense at some level. That's sort of a more classic debate, right? That we've had more in the in the military realm and the nuclear deterrence realm, but it's certainly a debate that's robust in the cyber field as well.
Has the US government ever gone on offense with respect to any of these state actors?
Well, there's always rumors, right? Those are ones that in general, uh, uh, a state like the United States would not come out unless they wanted to do that. It's one that's kind of hidden. So I would say mostly you're going to see that in news reporting, but notwithstanding this program, but so you have to sort of figure out whether that news reporting sources are true or not. And so it's not like a military strike or a drone strike, right? Where the level of deterrence is part of that level is we actually did that strike, military strike, and if you continue to do XYZ, we will do ABC. I think in this instance, it's more going to be in hidden, but the private message is sent and delivered.
Yes, I think we saw a little bit of that with Iran and with
Right.
Russia as well in recent years. So it seems to be, there is some outside signaling, probably after some inside signaling, just to make sure that the message was gotten across. We're going to
Right.
continue with our guest, Anthony Ruggiero. We've got one more segment to go with him, so please stay with us. We'll be back after a few short messages. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, as always, Tony Clement, here with Anthony Ruggiero. He's a North Korea cybercrime expert, formerly of the National Security Council of the United States, now with the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Anthony, we talked a little bit about state reaction to the cyber criminals, North Korean or otherwise. The Sony hack, which we started the program discussing a little bit, was such a brazen hack on a corporate entity. uh, have corporations gotten wise to this more since that hack? Are they doing things to protect themselves a little bit more these days?
Right. I think there have been other attacks, not just North Korea, but others that have made them more aware. I think as more information is emphasized about the Sony hack, I think people, it's so long ago, which is not really so long ago, right? Only 8 years, but for many of us, that seems like a long time ago. That I think people forget that there were stories about Sony had to write paper checks, and the emails were problematic. I mean, the stories go on, and that was North Korea 8 years ago.
Right.
Many of us can only imagine what North Korea and other even more sophisticated cyber actors can do. And then, as we referenced earlier, the brazen way that they tried to steal $1 billion from a central bank, the Bangladesh central bank, essentially sending these notices to the New York Federal Reserve, and then that story in of itself was also because that happened later. It is just amazing. And then the money they did get, they laundered in a sort of semi-traditional way, where they laundered much of it through casinos. Uh, so I think there's a lot that we need to do, but I think the awareness is being raised, as I noted earlier. The government structure, and then there's a I know there's a lot of outreach to corporations and other companies to make sure that we're all aware of that, and I'm sure you and I have experienced, whether it's our who we work for, or just being more cyber aware, is just something that we all have to be, because it's not just the state cyber elements that are trying to get us. There are smaller elements they're much more sophisticated than they used to be as well.
Well, I mean, this gets to the lessons learned, and you must, as you just observed, people are more aware of it. There's more malware to be concerned about. There's more, attempts to extort. So you're seeing this becoming much more of a societal topic of conversation, I suppose.
Yeah, I think there are people that are more aware of it. I suspect that we both remember that you can sort of pick out a bad cyber attempt at getting at you because of the language, or there was just something off about the messages, and some of that still happens, but it's, I think on the personal level it's certainly becoming much more sophisticated, which makes it harder for us to do that. And I know that that governments and others put out good cyber hygiene practices, and we've all got to be aware of that. To the point the question you asked on the Sony hack, and even some of these other hacks that we talk about with North Korea. Many of them start with clicking the wrong thing, whether it's a video or a document or something of that sort, which is still still a way for whether it's state sponsored or even criminals to get into us. So we have to be, if we're cyber aware, then and just more cautious, we can prevent that on a larger scale.
Yes, don't click on the link, I think should be the subtitle for this conversation. Is that right?
Right. I mean, or you can confirm that, a person that sent you something, or a document or a link, or something like that. And that only takes, a couple of minutes to do that. And it, can save you a lot of hassle in the end run.
Anthony Ruggiero, I want to thank you for coming on Boom or Bust. Very interesting conversation about cybercrime in North Korea in particular. And again, I think this will be of great interest to our viewers. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Interesting conversation with Anthony Ruggiero there. Very interesting takes on this really state sponsored cybercrime and what it could mean for us. So thanks for watching. I hope you found it useful.